arguably one of the most talented, it says in Hollywood, but I think he's one of the most talented people in the world. He can sing, act, he does comedy, and we've seen him in movies like Django, Dreamgirls, and he won an Oscar for Ray. You know what I mean? And even makes bangers. He's a tunes, I like. In it. In it. He's collaborated with the likes of Kanye West, Twista, Trey Songz, Ludacris, and T-Pain. Please give a massive welcome to Mr. Jamie Foxx.
Please take a seat. All right, so our next guest, I'd like to introduce to the floor. Not only did he star in this role, and led the way and became Bryan, he also co-produced the film, and he absolutely embodied his character. Many of us have seen him in The Wire, leading in Fruitvale Station, Creed. Of course, he was Eric Killmonger in Marvel's amazing Black Panther. And there's a couple rumors going on that he's also going to be the next Superman.
Wow.
Yeah, major. I don't know if those rumors are true. So, guys, please give a warm welcome to Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, man. Go get that suit, man. That boy clean.
Pistachio.
Is it pistachio? I thought it was celery green. Somebody got this.
And our third and final guest is probably more than anyone else the reason why we're all here today. His book, Just Mercy, was the inspiration behind the movie, and his character was beautifully portrayed by Michael B. Jordan. Well done, sir. An amazing job. He's an American lawyer, social justice activist, founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, and a clinical professor at New York University School of Law. Please give a warm welcome to the multi-award-winning American lawyer, Bryan Stevenson.
What a lineup. First of all, I'd like to just say congratulations, because as we walked in, I felt the emotion. I've seen the film, and I was just overwhelmed at how well the story was told, how it was put together. Firstly, the cast. You guys blew me away, and I think I speak for the majority of people in here that it was cast incredibly well. Incredibly well. I'm pretty sure Bryan's nodding. He's like, yes. So I was watching myself. So it's amazing.
It was. Jamie, you grew up in Texas, obviously, and the film was set in Alabama. Now, what parallels did you find in Just Mercy?
Well, I first of all, I love being where I'm from, being from the South and everything like that, but there are some things that you can draw upon when it comes to the racial divide. And so, you know, I drew upon it, and I commend, and I have to say this, I have to commend Michael B. Jordan for doing a film like this. He's a young, biggest star in the world, and could have been doing any movie that he wanted to, but the fact that he does this really speaks to our culture. The fact that we're now getting Bryan Stevenson's name out in the biggest way is amazing. And I say this all the time. What he did in Fruitvale Station, how he broke our hearts in that, and then he went on to Black Panther, where he was Killmonger. You know, he was actually bigger than Black Panther. He was big. But the narrative was still about our culture, and now this, it's amazing. And like to see what's happening now with how people are changed when they're watching. I just saw Oswald Boateng, who was a good friend of mine out here. He just watched the movie, and to see that he's filled up and he has so many questions, and he's and he wants to know what can he do, and that's been sort of like the response of everybody that you see that watches this film. And piggybacking on what you said about black and white people seeing this, just the background on the numbers on the movie, it tested as a 97 in front of an all black audience, and we hoped that, we expected that. Look at the brothers, like, yeah. But then they tested it in front of an all white audience, and oh, what did they say? And it was a 98. So this movie is so important. The fact that I am from the South gave me a little bit of intel on what it's like to have that type of racism in your face. I come from Terrell, Texas. Nobody? Okay. Okay, nobody? No?
What's this?
No?
I come from South London.
Sir. Well, that's how you do?
Wow, that's a clash in there.
Yes. But my town is a very small town, 12,000 people. But when you talk about the racial component, there was a young man by the name of Barack Hussein Obama. Anybody know who that is? Okay, well, when he won president in 2008, the only newspaper production not to put him on the front of the newspaper was Terrell, Texas. So in our newspaper, it's only 6 pages. And so, it's small. So even if you didn't vote for him, it's a keepsake. And to let you know the temperature, CNN went down to interview our newspaper, and they said, why didn't you put him on the front of the newspaper? They said, hey, listen, we run a newspaper, not a scrapbook. So you understand where I come from. It doesn't say that all people in the South are that, but those people that are in charge, those people who have been voted into positions are the ones who can make life very uncomfortable as a black person. So I'm happy to be a part of this, and I think this is the most important movie I've ever done.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Now, Michael, what was it about this film? I mean, I've listened to a few interviews that you've done, and you said when I came across Bryan, it was like coming across a superhero.
Yeah.
And I think we can all now see why you would say such an amazing thing about Bryan. He's blushing. But not only are you starring in this film, you co-produced it. So what was it about this film that was just sucked you in?
I think for me it was when I read his memoir and I started to understand the work that he was doing. I felt a little embarrassed that I didn't know that much about him. I was like, man, how does he exist? And I never knew it. So I got a chance to listen to his TED Talk and hear him speak, and got a chance to meet him and get to know him over a period of time. And I guess it was the feeling of like, why isn't he a household name? What can I do? How can I use my platform to get him to the masses? So I kind of ran towards the idea of making this movie. And he's been so involved with us writing the script and developing draft after draft over about 4 or 5 years. And we finally felt like we got it in the right place. Warner Brothers came on board to help distribute and get this movie seen around the world. And it was I don't know, I wanted people to have that same feeling of self-discovery or of discovering themselves, discovering Bryan Stevenson like I did. And yeah, just had to do it. I mean, how could I not? You know what I'm saying? It's like, being black in America, being wearing the skin, with the presumption of guilt that comes along with it. How to help change that narrative. How can I help change the perception of what it is to be black. Yeah, I just had to be a part of that.
Yeah.
So Bryan, this film is obviously based on the book that you wrote, and obviously your amazing work. What was it like the first time you saw this on the big screen?
It was surreal, just because in all of my years representing people on death row, going into jails and prisons, standing next to people who've been condemned, people have been told that their life has no meaning or purpose or value. I've always wanted people to kind of wake up and pay attention. We've got thousands of innocent people in jails and prisons in America. We have people who are treated so cruelly. When I wrote the book, I was hoping that people would read it, and I was so floored when people did. And then when the movie came along, I was really excited. I was apprehensive at first because, Hollywood doesn't always get this right. And that's why I'm also so grateful to Michael, because when he got involved, it was clear that he's not only talented and creative, but he's also really dedicated to these issues, and he put his heart into it. And then when Jamie came on, you could see in his performance, his whole heart is in this performance, and you see the weight and the pain and the anguish and the suffering that so many of us have had to endure because we are presumed guilty, we are presumed dangerous. And then when the rest of the cast gave all of that, I was really moved. I was really honored. And I can't tell you how excited I am now, to share this with the world. I've always believed that if people saw what I see on a regular basis, if you saw children being put in adult jails and prisons where they're abused, if you saw mothers having to get pulled away from kids or being put in prison for life, if you had to meet people whose loved ones were going to be put in an electric chair and executed, you'd begin to understand the depth of this problem, the weight of this problem. And now, through these extraordinary performances, people will get to see that. And I think when they see that, they'll be motivated to do things. I think they'll be motivated to do what we say in the film, which is to stand up even though others will say, sit down. They'll be motivated to speak even though others will say, be quiet. They'll be motivated to pick up the mantle. We're from America, and we couldn't be where we are if people hadn't fought and bled and died to create the opportunities that we have. I'm standing on the shoulders of people who did so much more with so much less. And I want to honor what they did, what they gave to me. And we just want that to be given to another generation. And I think this film can play an important role in opening minds, but also opening hearts. And so it's been really exciting for me.
You said that Hollywood sometimes changed the narrative. We basically watched a movie length of something that you lived for years.
Yeah.
Was there something in those years that you were like, look, this has to be in the film?
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that was really important to me is that the Herbert Richardson story and that execution was an important part of the film. I believe that each person is more than the worst thing they've ever done. I think none of us are just crimes. I think if somebody tells a lie, they're not just a liar. If somebody takes something, they're not just a thief. Even if you kill somebody, you're not just a killer. And that idea was really important to me. And, Jamie plays a character who was innocent. O'Shea plays a character who was innocent. I didn't want the story to be all innocent people. Because if we got all the innocent people out of jails and prisons, we'd still have an unjust system. You can be guilty and unfairly sentenced. You can be guilty and excessively punished. And so Herbert's story, Herbert who did something wrong, but nonetheless was traumatized by his time in Vietnam, that was an important part of the story for me, and when I see the film, I lived through, what happened that night, and it was just so surreal going to the prison, and we have that conversation that you see, and Herbert saying, how strange the day had been. They do shave your body before they put you in the electric chair to execute you. And when he said to me that night, Bryan, it's been so strange because all day long people have been saying, what can I do to help you? And when he said, they came to me in the morning, they said, what do you want for breakfast? And at midday, they said, what do you want for lunch? In the evening, they said, what do you want for dinner? And he kept saying, Bryan had been saying all day long, what can I do to help you? And I never will forget him saying, he said, Bryan, has been so strange. More people have said, what can I do to help you in the last 14 hours of my life than they ever did in the first 19 years of my life. And when I was holding that man's hands, I couldn't help but think, where were they when you were 3 and your mom died? And where were they when you were 7 and you were being abused? And where were they when you were 14 experimenting with drugs? Where were they when you came back from Vietnam, having given your life, risked your life to save this country? They abandoned you and they lined up to execute you. And the pain of having been pulled away and stuff, you did that electric chair was really, really challenging. But it was important to me to lead the people to see that, to see Michael's performance, to experience the watch of him. Because until you understand the pain of injustice, the weight of inequality, the brutality of bigotry and bias, you're not going to do the fight for yourself. And that's what was really important to me. And I just really encourage, we've been talking about this, to bring over the American society, understanding concerning families, who say, this thing didn't work, that maybe something good will happen to my lifetime. And that's the really inspiring thing for me, is we can revive this hopefulness, this belief that we can create a more just system. And it's not just a movie. It's a statement about what happens when people pull together and they use their voices to fight for the things that matter.
Absolute word, sorry, right. And that's it. Thank you.
Really different character. What was it about Walt McMillan that, and how did you channel him? How did you get into character? How did you channel the energy of Walter?
Well, first of all, aesthetically we look alike. Like we have the same, cheekbones and the diamond head and the box cut. I had that in the '80s. So that when you're trying to portray a character that's actually lived, that helps because he wasn't around for me to ask questions. But with Michael and Bryan, there, Bryan would let me know that he was still gregarious. He was still, he was still hopeful in this bad situation. Now I've been to death row before, and the worst thing you can give a death row inmate is hope. And so what he said, but Walter was the opposite of that. And so that's why you see in the movie, which I thought Destin and Michael put this together beautifully, the fact that the three inmates, the way we interacted, I thought that was really really important for the film because you could see beyond the horrible situation, it was still human. And so we were able to, I think by doing that, people could really tap into who we were. And then when it came to the way he spoke, just being from the South and having that speech, we talked about how much of that we wanted to do because we still wanted it to be audible. We wanted people to understand what I was saying, but we also wanted to make you understand that he is from a specific region, and being from that region, even in the voice, you could tell that something is different. So, like I said, the putting the character together was one, and then the jail. I don't like jail. I ain't like none of that part of going to jail. And I said, let's shoot this shit and get on. But it was an interesting thing when we were going to the jail. The correctional officer that was the actor asked the real correctional officer, what would we do with the cuffs? And they're behind me, but he didn't know I could hear him. But he leaned over and says, "Put him on tighter. He's a bigger one." And I said, "Hey man, the cuffs is tight enough. Don't, But that that put something in my head that when I went in, and by the time I was talking to Mike, all of the anger, all of the everything, makes the character now take off in the right direction. So that was basically finding Walt.
With that in mind, there's a scene where Bryan gets pulled over by the police and he's harassed. It's quite a difficult scene for many of us to watch. What were you trying to kind of get across in that instance? Jamie's saying you embody these characters, you become them. So the real frustration can come out of you, and I guess it is up to you then to kind of get the skill to control yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pulled over multiple times, for no reason at all. Car searched, the whole nine. That's unfortunately it's common. It's expected. It's something before as a kid your parents sit you down and give you the talk of what it means to be black outside of the house. How do you interact with law enforcement? How do you deal with authority? How do you conduct yourself at a routine stop? We're kind of desensitized a little bit to that. So specifically for the scene, what that feels like. What does it feel like to be violated in that type of way? But still remembering where you are. Knowing that you have things you have to do. You have to act a certain type of way. Bryan had to be very thoughtful and reserved and restrained in his line of work, especially down in the South. So in that moment, he couldn't. It was one of the few times you really saw him on the borderline of really reacting, without really thinking about the consequences, and I wanted to kind of show him walk right up to that edge and then remember what he had to do, where he had to go, who he was fighting for. So much of his work is putting his own ego and pride to the side for the betterment of his client, and I just wanted to, that's such a huge part of him and who he is. I just wanted to make sure that was consistent and truthful throughout the movie.
Bryan, how much guidance did you give Michael in playing you?
Well, I mean, he's really talented. I mean, people don't really appreciate the kind of skill that these men have. And when I met Michael, it was already clear that he had thought a lot about how to do this. And to be honest, when I first met him, the thing that blew me away, it wasn't how skilled as an actor he was. It wasn't how talented he was. It was how genuinely nice he is. He's a good human being. This is a really solid human being, and he doesn't have the pretense and the ego that I expected. And that just made me really hopeful that we could work together in a way that could really be powerful, and we have. And he was just fantastic. I think we spent a lot of time on sort of the choreography of moving in a courtroom, because you can actually. This is the thing, as a lawyer, when you watch these lawyer movies, the thing that really frustrates you is when people do things you just can't ever do in a court, and I didn't want that to be part of this film. And he really mastered that choreography. He knew where to stand, he knew where to move, he knew how to position himself. We were just doing something, I was watching it again, and he really has it down. And so, we talked about things like that, but most of it was just the heart, and you heard him say it. To do the kind of work I do, you have to be tactical and strategic. If all we needed was anger to create justice, we would have had justice a long time ago. You've got to be tactical. You've got to figure out how to move people from point A to point B. And he really brought that to the performance. He was very, very committed to being authentic, being true. We used some of the actual transcripts and the script for the film. And so it was a real thrill working with him. And I joked with him because I said, he was talking about authenticity so much that I said, well, now the one area where we don't have to be authentic, you don't have to lose that Black Panther Creed body when you're and that's all right. I don't have a problem with that. But it was, and it's been such a thrill for me. I've gotten to spend a lot of time with these guys. I love these guys. They are really wonderful human beings who care deeply about these issues. And that's an unexpected thrill for me in doing this project, is to get to work with wonderful people like Michael and Jamie. That's been a real honor.
You mentioned the courtroom, that final courtroom scene, like Jamie and Michael. What was that like to shoot? What was it like being on the set that day?
It was, you know, when you get a script, you know, for me, I had the luxury of developing from day one. You circle certain scenes that you really look forward to doing. You're like, all right, this is the day, this is the big, you know, courtroom scenes, a lot of dialogue. And Bryan said I couldn't really ad-lib or improv that because it's exactly what he said. So I couldn't, so I knew I had to get all that stuff down pretty tight. And I was anxious, man. I wanted to get it right really bad. It was you know, the courtroom was packed. It was a long day too. It was a long day. What's up, man? I see you.
This to me was the most incredible part of the film. Because he wanted to get that speech right. And people, if I could make you understand, like, there's two different Hollywoods. There's a celebrity who just wants to be, you know, the Hollywood and that, but then there's the people who are actually the actors. And so during that scene, you know, he cared about it, and he did mess up a couple of times. He flubbed lines a couple of times, but he's so nice every time he mess up. Oh, sorry, bro. Sorry about that. Sorry, bro. Sorry. Sorry, my bad. And so I pulled him to the side and said, hey, you don't have to apologize. This is your film. You put this together. You ain't got to apologize to us. I said, if it take you 30 minutes to say one line, take it. That boy went over there, did something, I don't know what he did, got his mind together, came back, and then he lullabied it. And it was so incredible that the extras gave him a standing ovation, right? And then I went to, you know, to touch his arm, to congratulate, and he, you know, jerked away. I said, oh. And he walked out, and I said, oh, and you know, black people call it the Holy Ghost. So he's got the Holy Spirit. And so I was proud, you know, I did it. And then I texted him, I said, yo, I said, what you just did was monumental. The people in the fourth row are weeping. And so, you don't, in other words, you don't see that a lot. You don't see someone actually care, and the fact that he cared about it makes it amazing.
Yeah, and Jamie, like, you know, he held me down. Like, I've known Jamie for a really long time. He's like been a mentor, you know, to me, and always giving me advice. And you know, throughout this whole movie, this whole process, I couldn't imagine anybody else like championing me the way he has. And I've learned so much, and just little things you lose track of wanting something so bad in the moment. You know, just those little words that he told me made all the difference for that scene for me. So, you know, I owe a lot of that to him.
Well, you killed it.
About this for a really long time. First of all, thank you so much for sharing this with us. Bryan, thank you so much for sharing your story. Michael, Jamie, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of something so amazing, creating something so amazing.
Thank you guys for being here and doing this. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. Guys, please give it up for our special guest.